1978 saw the success of the film Grease, a hit musical set during the Eisenhower administration. The film followed the plight of a greaser and a pure-hearted Australian virgin who set aside their conflicting identities for the sake of teenage romance. The main characters commit grand theft auto, race cars, and moon a national television audience, all in good fun. Then there's Eugene. Eugene is almost an extra in the film, a giddy, four-eyed, bow-tied-wearing square. He represents the archetype of the happy nerd. He is ridiculed, pushed around, and excluded as nerds often are. But he is clueless about his outcast state. The happy nerd does not show loneliness. He does not cry himself to sleep. He is gullible. He is joyful and full of giggles and smiles. In a way, the happy nerd, a staple of teen comedies, teaches us that nerd bashing is a victimless crime. Making fun of nerds is okay. They won't notice. In the 1980s, technology and the nerd broke onto the scene. They were intelligent, savvy, and they stood up for themselves. In the 1985 film The Breakfast Club, Anthony Michael Hall brings depth to nerdity. He was not a happy nerd. He was excluded. He contemplated suicide. He was not a mere square or teacher's pet. He was thoughtful and had an independent mind. As Timothy Shary said, his resistance to romance and to changing himself to look like or act like the others, something the rest do, indicates he's the least conformist of the bunch. Also in 1985, a film came around that put nerd oppression, pride, and rebellion on the map. The opening theme spoke to both the nerds and the popular elite. If they call you a dork, a spaz, or a geek, stand up and be proud. Don't be meek. Beautiful people, haven't you heard? The time has come for revenge of the nerds. When I was in grade school, this was my favorite movie. I wrote a short story version of it. I remember at 9 years old saying to my cousin, "I want to be a nerd." I had no idea what a nerd was. I only knew the nerds of the film who stood up for themselves, had parties, and were proud of who they were. In contrast to the makeover films that would dominate the 1990s, these nerds did not surrender their identities and their rise to power. They made the most of who they were. They united their intelligence and technological genius to conquer the jocks and fight for their rights. It is nerd pride that Gilbert calls for in the final scene.
I just wanted to say that I'm a nerd. And I'm here tonight to stand up for the rights of other nerds. I mean, all our lives, we've been laughed at and made to feel inferior. And tonight, those bastards, they trashed our house. Why? Because we're smart? Because we look different? Well, we're not. I'm a nerd, and I'm pretty proud of it.
In the 1990s, the nerds seemed to slip away from films. There was the popular kid who came onto the big screen. As theorist Alyssa Quart said, teenage blockbusters, among them Clueless, Bring It On, She's All That, Legally Blonde, and Varsity Blues, had become the stories of insiders. Sports stars, beauties, rich kids, and cheerleaders. These kids live in the blondest, richest suburbs. Suburbs without seasons. The characters have abs so hard and defined it seem to replace their personalities. As the nerd left film, however, his presence on television grew. These were not, however, the multifaceted nerds of the 80s. For whatever reason, perhaps a growing consumerism and a sense of the nerd as a greedy corporate Bill Gates character, the 90s was a bad time for nerds. These television nerds were happy nerds, childlike, clueless, and fair targets for ridicule. On Saved by the Bell, the nerdy Screech was a friend of the popular kids, but they often treated him more like a mascot than an equal. He was gullible, inept, and often used by his friends. Other nerd characters appear on the show, all replicas of the same stereotype, adorned with glasses and pocket protectors. They are objects of ridicule, but happily ignorant of insults. The show Family Matters broke the nerd racial barrier with the introduction of Steve Urkel. In Urkel, black pride and nerd pride could coexist. But Urkel is also a stereotypical happy nerd. He is there to irritate and be made fun of. To win the heart of his love interest Laura, he invented a machine that transformed him into the suave and sexy Stefan. The 90s nerd must sacrifice his nerd identity to gain popular acceptance. There was nerd hope in the late 1990s in characters like Daria, the improbable, moody, and nerdy Beavis and Butthead spin-offs. Daria, which aired in 1997, brought a nerd to MTV, full of ironic, pithy one-liners about the shallow high school culture around her. This time it was the popular kids who didn't get the jokes. Daria ran for 5 seasons and led us into a new millennium. In the past 10 years, as Facebook, iPods, MP3 players, and blogs were recognized by youths as tools for free expression and identity formation, a triumphant nerd mania has taken over. In television, Ugly Betty, Freaks and Geeks, The Big Bang Theory, Chuck, Glee, and the reality show Beauty and the Geek showed nerds fighting to preserve their nerd identities while gaining love and acceptance. Film has increasingly paid homage to the nerd. In 2009, a big-budget Star Trek prequel became the highest-grossing film in the history of the once nerdy franchise. Comic books and graphic novels, once a nerd domain, exploded into Hollywood. X-Men, Fantastic Four, The Incredible Hulk, 300, A History of Violence, The Punisher, Kick-Ass, and Watchmen were known to the comic world before they came on screen. And of course, in 2002, Spider-Man, the 9th highest-grossing film in history. With Spider-Man, we had Peter Parker, a nerd superhero played by Tobey Maguire, fighting for justice and Kirsten Dunst. Spider-Man put the word out on the streets. Nerds can kick ass. The leading role has been going more and more frequently to the nerd. Michael Cera brought meek and geeky charm to films such as Juno, Superbad, Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and the romantic nerd love documentary Paper Heart. Steve Carell brought an older nerd charm to the 40-year-old virgin in the television show The Office. One popular culture sensation, however, has surpassed all the rest. Imagine 3 friends in high school. 2 are skinny, awkward boys, shy around girls, and the third is an obsessive, nerdy girl who spends most of her time in the library and uses time travel to take more classes. The 3 are close friends with the principal, and they're the most popular kids in school.
Anything you couldn't explain?
The Harry Potter series includes some of the best-selling books of all time and 4 of the 50 highest-grossing films. The franchise is a nerd cultural sanctuary featuring witches, wizards, and magical creatures.
Dear Mr. Potter,
They have marked the cultural ascendancy of nerddom. The era of the nerd is upon us. I found that in popular culture at least, nerds are on the rise. The results of my survey have echoed a change in nerdiness. Teenagers were as likely to mention role-playing games as intelligence in describing what a nerd is. Computers were often viewed as no longer nerdy, and respondents of all ages seemed to view the word nerd more as a friendly moniker among friends than an insult. There was nothing in the survey results that suggests a difference in how nerds are treated in schools. More work should be done in the field. Most of the self-proclaimed nerds who responded deny ever being mistreated for nerdiness. The reason, many of them say, is that nerds are segregated into honors and advanced placement courses, or schools for gifted students. More work should be done to see if this segregation has made it worse for nerds in inclusion classrooms, and how to bring the nerd-friendly environment of the honors class to all classes. 2 Hispanic females, 117, 124, both responded to the survey. Both considered themselves nerd and denied any connections between nerd and race. Although many acknowledge the stereotype of the Asian nerd, most people do not believe that it's more difficult for a minority to be a nerd. There is, however, a limited sample size. More work should be done to see to what extent acting nerdy is looked down upon as acting white. Weird Al's song is, after all, titled White and Nerdy. We've come a long way since the nerds Gilbert and Lewis conquered the alpha betas. If intellect is becoming cool, we have to nurture this trend. So if you think you know whether Schrodinger's cat is dead or alive, if you've used the word semiotics in a sentence, or if you have a shrine to Stan Lee in your living room, be proud of who you are.